Our talk this afternoon is Weaving the Dance, Religious Imagery in Navajo Textiles. I'll begin first with a brief history of the Navajo people. The way we think of the Navajos now is the way they are pictured here in this image. The Navajo woman with her long skirt and her velveteen blouse sitting on a sheepskin and weaving on an upright loom. These looms were portable so that the Navajos could move them around. And if you notice, the rug she's weaving is done in geometric forms. And when you think of Navajo rugs, you typically think of weavings with geometric forms. Where did the Navajos come from? The Navajos speak an Athapascan language, which is similar to the language spoken by the Apaches, but is very different from the language spoken by the Pueblos. The Athapascan language is similar to the Indian languages spoken in Western Canada and Alaska. The Navajos came down then from the north, probably around 1350, and when they arrived at the Four Corners area, I don't know how familiar you are with Western geography, Four Corners is where the states of Utah, Colorado, Arizona, and New Mexico come together. They discovered the presence of, or rather the ruins, the remains of the Anasazi people, the ancient ones who were there already in the 1100s and the 1200s. And if some of you have visited Mesa Verde, you'll have visited this cliff palace there. These people, however, had disappeared and were no longer living there, and they are thought to be the ancestors of the Pueblos. This is the state of New Mexico, which is one of those four corners. And where the Navajos settled was in this area circled in red. It's the San Juan River, the Gobernador Canyon, the Largo River in that corner. And they called their area the Dineta, the home of the Dine. And in their language, Dine is the people. They are the five-finger people, the earth surface people. But they soon found out that there were neighbors, and these were the Rio Grande Pueblo Indians. They were probably, as I said, their ancestors were the Anasazis, and they probably, because of drought, moved eastward and settled along the Rio Grande River where there was a better source of water. They built their homes in a style that's similar to the cliff dwellings, except they built them in adobe. They were called the Pueblos because their towns looked like pueblos or cities. Of course, they didn't call themselves the Pueblos. It's the Spanish explorers who named them the Pueblo Indians because of their town-like structures. The Spanish explorers in the late 1500s came up from Mexico and followed the Rio Grande River north. And then they met up with the Rio Grande Pueblos. They were able to conquer these Indians because they were sedentary Indians. The Navajo, on the other hand, were living in canyons and were more nomads. And for a long time, the Spanish explorers weren't quite sure who these Dineta were. They were related to their cousins, the Apaches, and they were still wearing skins and looking like the way you think the Apache Indians in Geronimo looked. And they had been in contact with the Pueblos. They had learned to weave with cotton when they were there in that area. And when the Spanish explorers came in, they, of course, as they started building their missions, they came up from Mexico in 1600 with 7,000 head of livestock, cattle, horses, sheep, and of course this was very attractive to the Indians, especially the horses. And so we now think of the Western Indians as riding horses, but they have the horses because they raided the Spanish missions and stole the horses. So the Navajos then had horses. They were in that corner of New Mexico, the Dineta. And gradually, as more Spanish came in, the Spanish started raiding the Navajos. The Navajo women had learned to weave and were good weavers. And other Indian tribes, the Utes, the Comanches, the Apaches, would raid the Navajos and take the women and children, especially the girl children, and sell them as slaves to the Spaniards. Then the Navajos would, of course, fight back and bring their... And so it was constant warfare going on between the Indian tribes and the Spanish. It was getting so dangerous, in a sense, and they had so many herds that increased in size that they slowly moved westward. Now, for the Navajos, their land is surrounded by 4 important mountains. The San Francisco Peak, La Plata Mountain, it's in Utah, or almost on the Colorado border, and Blanca Peak, and then to the east and south, Mount Taylor. And so within these 4 sacred mountains is the land that the Navajos came to think of as their special land. Now, the Dineta was over a little bit, it's more a little bit to the side of the D, towards the, where it says Colorado Plateau. So from the Dineta, to find better room to herd their sheep, they moved westward, and they went into an area which you may have visited, which is now in the center of the reservation, called the Canyon de Chelly. And so this was their movement towards the Canyon de Chelly. And so the center of the Navajo world was now more westward in Arizona at the Canyon de Chelly. The Navajo tribe multiplied. They had many sheep. They were nomadic. They were afraid of the Hispanic. And they became more secretive about their ceremonies, which is what we'll be talking about today. Much of their religion seems to have been somewhat inspired by what they saw at the Rio Grande Pueblos, certain types of dances, certain types of costumes. The Rio Grande Pueblo dances were open. They were in the center of the Pueblos, so the Spanish could observe them, and the Navajos could observe them also. There are certain elements in their religion, however, which are reminiscent of religious elements in the Athapascan northern Canadian tribes of having a large feast and giving away many things to all the people who come. So their ceremonies are a combination of giving things away, but it's a private ceremony only for Navajos. I believe also that they didn't want the Hispanics to know too much about them, because the Spanish were, as missionaries, were trying to force them to convert, and the forced conversion often meant working on the missions and becoming sedentary and growing crops. And so they were, although they were doing some rock paintings when they were in the Dineta, once they had moved into Canyon de Chelly, they began, many taboos were set up, and one of them that was quite strict at the time was that there should be no permanent representation of any religious imagery. They probably didn't want anybody else to know about their religion. This is the same map again, and you can imagine now where the Navajos were. So here was a people that was still fighting heavily with the Spaniards when Spain became independent, when Mexico became independent of Spain in 1821. Then it was the same people who were buying the slaves, but they were now Mexicans instead of Spaniards. And then in 1848, the United States annexed this part of the country. The Navajos at first thought that perhaps the Americans would help smooth things down with their enemies, the Mexicans, the Utes, the Paiutes. But the Americans just sent in their military, and the fighting continued between the Navajos and the U.S. military and with the various Indian tribes. More military came in during the Civil War, but this land was secured already before 1864. But the Navajos were still on the rampage. I mean, they would fight, but then people would fight back. It was constant warfare, and the idea was the Americans thought they wanted to pacify the Navajos. Now, as you recall, all the Indians who were on the eastern seaboard, when they weren't quite pacified, they were sent west. As we moved westward, the Indians were sent westward. They were given reservations in Oklahoma. That was before we discovered there was oil in Oklahoma, and we wanted the reservations back. So they thought they would send the Navajos eastward so that they could become farmers, and then they would be peaceful. So here's Canyon de Chelly up here, and they decided they would send them over to Fort Sumner along the Pecos River. This is many hundreds of miles away. And it's obviously outside of the realm of the region of the four sacred mountains. They sent Kit Carson in to help round up the Navajos. Now, the Navajos were fighters. These were canyons. They could hide. And what Kit Carson did was he went into the canyons in the summer, and he just simply killed as many sheep as he could find. He burned the crops. He burned down what he came across. It's a little bit the way Sherman, in his scorched earth policy in the Civil War, as he was moving through the South. And so when winter came, the Navajos had no food and no sheep and no corn. And they were told, if you go to Fort Defiance and give yourselves up, we will feed you and take care of you. And they were moved, however, to Fort Sumner. This was called the Long Walk for the Navajos. Many people died on the walk, but thousands of them made it. Many of their sheep didn't make it, those sheep they had left. And they got to Fort Sumner, the Bosque Redondo, because it once was a nice rounded area with a river and nice trees around it. But after the first winter, the Navajos had cut down all the wood. So the next year they didn't have much heat. They were afraid that when anybody died in a building, in a home, in a Navajo home, in a hogan, nobody else would go into that hogan. So they were giving housing at Fort Sumner, but if somebody died within the housing they were given, they would leave that house and would sort of just dig a pit outside and put a few blankets on it because they were afraid to stay in that house. It was a terrible situation for everybody, also for the military who was trying to feed them and keep track of them. After the Civil War then, it was felt that Americans should move the Navajos on to Oklahoma, where other Indian tribes were. The Navajos, however, said, no, we want to go back to our land. Nobody really wants our land. The Americans didn't. It was just canyons and desert-like mountains. Petrified forest is out there. And they said, we promise that we will be sedentary, we will not be militant, we will not attack you. And that was one treaty that both sides more or less kept, and they went back to the Canyon de Chelly. And that's where they are now. The reservation, which has increased in size, there's the Canyon de Chelly. You notice that they're very close to the Hopi Indians. There's a Hopi reservation there. And the part that is over here in New Mexico is called the Checkerboard Reservation. It's land where the Navajos are, but other people are there too. It was called Checkerboard because at homesteading the land was divided into sections which were square, and the Navajos had some of them, and other white settlers had other parts. So this is where the Navajos are right now. The Navajo spiritual universe. For a long time, the American military, until the 1880s, thought that the Navajos had no religion at all. They knew that Pueblos had a religion, but the Navajos weren't practicing any religion because none of their rites at Fort Sumner were valid because they were outside of their sacred area, so they couldn't call the gods to come. And when they got back to their reservation, they made sure that nobody knew that they were having any ceremonies. Some of these ceremonies are in hidden away places, or they're at night, and certainly none of the whites were invited to attend. For the Navajos, reality is complex. It is the world that you see around you, but there's also the whole unseen world. In their creation story, which I can't get into, it would take about 5 hours to describe, because the Navajos have tremendously long and complex myths that also nobody knew about or appreciated. This is now the fifth world, the world of the Earth's surface people. But in 4 prior worlds where there were feuds and floods and problems, there were the ant people, the insect people, and they moved up, and gradually there were the holy people, the Yeas, and certain gods. And these earth people are in the form of the Yeas, the holy people. And you don't see the Yeas, but they're around, so that you have the clouds that you see, but they're also cloud Yeas, animated. There are corn Yeas, male and female corn Yeas. There are animals who are Yeas. There are arrow people who are Yeas. And they are around. They have potential for good and evil, and the human being also has the good side and the bad side. You want to just keep everything in balance. Another important concept is that of motion. The Navajos move. They moved as nomads. They moved as hunters. a young child, when he can start to walk and run, wakes up in the morning with the sun and is told to run east as far as he can go until he's tired and then run back. There's the puberty ceremony for the young women also includes a race at the end where the young woman runs as far as she can and comes back before she serves a cake she has made to the people who are in attendance. And creativity is also seen as movement rather than an end product. Here we think of art. Somebody has made a painting, and then we have it down in the museum. For the Navajo, the creativity is in the creative act. It's the songs you sing, the prayers you're saying, the creation, and then the actual object is not as important. So the Navajos could sell their weavings. Weaving the weaving was the creative act, not holding on to the rug. And in the sand paintings that we'll talk about in a moment, making the sand painting was the creative act, but then that painting was destroyed. For the Navajo, wellness or health is a matter of beauty, harmony, being in harmony with the universe. If you're sick, it's that something is wrong with this harmony. And remember, there's the unseen world as well as the seen world. Perhaps you went near a tree that had been struck by lightning. Perhaps you stepped on an ant as you were walking down the path, and the ant people are unhappy. Perhaps you were fighting with people in your family. That's a kind of disharmony you're aware of, but there are all these other disharmonies that you're not aware of. And so if you are sick in any way, you would go to a hand trembler or somebody who would try to figure out why it was that you were sick. Go back to your history, maybe your mother when she was pregnant, they're going back and decide what type of ceremony you would need. These ceremonies, come on in, are called chantways because they are directed by a medicine man who sings, who's often called the singer. There's some seats over here. Please come over here. Theirs is not a formal religion. There's no priests. There are no kivas or central places like the Pueblos had. But there are certain medicine men, people who maybe have learned because they've memorized all of the prayers that are needed for a one-day ceremony or a 5-day ceremony or a 9-day ceremony. They have memorized the chants and the sand paintings, if there are some, and the drawings to be done. They may practice and have they may work as an apprentice for 5, 6, 7 years, and then maybe they are able to do one ceremony. You have to do the ceremony correctly, or else the yays that you are trying to call in to help you are going to be upset. So that this medicine man wants to do a perfect sing or chant to help the patient get well. And what the Navajos are striving to reach is hojo, which means beauty, harmony with the universe. And they have beautiful prayers, which the blessing way, which say, I walk in beauty, beauty before me, beauty behind me, beauty above me, beauty to the side. That this idea of beauty and harmony is their sense of, I suppose one could say, of sanctity or of blessedness. It's that you're in harmony with everybody. And that's what the religious ceremonies strive to do. One of the best known ceremonies, and it's one of the largest and longest, is the night way. The night way is performed for people who have problems that are generally related to the head. This could be mental illness, but it could also be anything. You're somewhat depressed, something isn't quite right, you don't have the energy you thought you. So that the night way is prescribed for people who want to get back into harmony, and they believe that this ceremony would be the best one for them. It's a ceremony that can only be held in winter, once the killing frost has come, once the bears are hibernating and the snakes are hibernating. Then you can have the night way ceremony. It's a 9-day ceremony, so that a special ceremonial hogan is built. The patient, many prayers are said for these 9 days. There are emetics, patient vomits, there are sweat lodge ceremonies, and there are, for the last 4 or 5 days, there are large sand paintings. And here you see on the screen 2 medicine men making one of these sand paintings. The sand is flattened out in the hogan, and then with you might call them dry paintings because it might be mineral pigments or pollen or other colors. They try to make the images, and if you look carefully at the bottom, you see there are 2 yay figure images, and then a corn plant as you're moving upwards, and then 2 other images that have been painted on the ground. These are the depictions of the holy people, the way they like to be depicted. The idea of the ceremony is that if you do this picture correctly, and you've put out some feathered wands also to let the holy people know that a ceremony is going on, they will come. And if they are happy with the prayers, and especially if they're happy with the drawings, they will be there with their power. The patient, that once this painting is done, and it's probably taken 2 or 3 or 4 assistants, or maybe sometimes 8 or 9 assistants of the medicine man, the patient sits on the painting. So it's just barely finished when already somebody walks and sits on it. And then parts of the painting, the sand is applied to the patient's body in a healing ceremony. And by nightfall, the painting has to disappear, and all the sand is swept up and has to be deposed to the north so that the yays will not be angered with it. Now, these paintings are then not permanent, and they were also not to be seen by anybody except those who were involved in the ceremony. On the 9th day of the Nightway is the Yebiche dance. But before I get to the Yebiche dance, 1 second here, it's fine. I should add that this is the one ceremony that all adult or adolescent and adult men and women are familiar with in the Navajo country, because as part of the ceremony on an earlier night is the initiation of the young Navajo boys and girls. They have been told that the gods, especially Yebiche, the grandfather gods, will punish them if they're bad. It's sort of like the boogeyman. And as part of the initiation, they are brought into the hogan. They have to keep their eyes closed. They're sort of hit with a switch by the gods. And then as they open their eyes, these gods take off their masks, and they realize that these are people from their own clan who've been performing the ceremony. So that although some chantways are not well known by all people, the Nightway is well known. It's especially known for the last night, the Yebiche dance. Yebiche, as I will explain in a few moments, is the grandfather of the Yays, of the holy people. And he and the holy people come and they dance. They dance for the patient. The patient comes out of the hogan, blesses the gods, and the gods perform a dance in a very ritual way, and they perform the dance 4 times. 4 is the mystic number for the Navajos, the 4 sacred mountains, the 4 cardinal directions. Any prayer is repeated 4 times. They come, and a team of dancers will dance the ritual 4 times, and then maybe there's another team that uses the same masks and will dance another 4 times. And this goes on all night long until the sun comes up. In the early part of the 20th century, there were sometimes 1,000 people who would come to a Nightway ceremony, because anybody in attendance also received some of the blessed power of the Yays. This is a carving of some of the participants in the Yebiche dance. It's a carving by an artist called Klitzo Dedman, and it was done around 1940. But it gives you a clearer picture of how an artist might view these figures. This is the male Yay. He has a round head in the sand paintings, and he wears a head mask, which is deerskin to the front and the back, and a little gourd sticking out through the mouth where he can breathe, and spruce around his neck. And he holds generally a gourd and a twig. Here he's holding 2 twigs. And he wears a kilt and leggings. Next to him is the female Yay. The role of the female Yay was often danced by men in the same kilt. You see the same attire and white body paint. But the female has a square mask in front and wears the hair down. Yebiche is the maternal grandfather of these Yays, and he leads the dance. He has 12 eagle feathers on his head mask, and he wears a sacred deerskin and carries a medicine bag. And this little guy, who's generally a little bit shorter than the others, water sprinkler, is often danced by an adolescent boy and is sort of the clown, similar to the clown in some of the Hopi dances. He can run around and do anything. But the 2 the main dance team has to follow the steps in precisely the way it is to be danced. They're also not allowed to talk in their masks. They have a song that is sort of woo, woo, woo is a call of Yebiche, and then it's syllables, but that don't have meaning for this dance. And so there's different versions of the song, but it's, again, I mentioned motion. It's this movement of the dance which is a healing thing for the patient. This is a photograph of one of the gods, a different one in the Nightway ceremony. He doesn't appear in the Yebiche dance. It was taken by Curtis. Curtis was photographing the Navajos around 1904. And he also wanted to photograph a Yebiche dance. But he was there in the summer. The Yebiche dance is only in the winter. The Yebiche dance is done at night. His camera, of course, couldn't film at night, and he was there in the summer. So finally, probably with paying a few people pretty heavily, he managed to get Navajos who would be willing to put on the attire and to do the dance for him in the summer. And he did a short film in 1904 where they tried to compact all of the movements of this dance into about 1 minute. This is Yebiche, who brings in the dance troupe. Male, female, male, female. They divide into two lines, then male and female. And the observer said it was sort of like a Virginia reel, the way they go, its formation. You notice from this picture that these dancers generally have a foxtail hanging down it's attached to their concha belts, and it's hanging down behind their kilts. That one has one or two of them seem to have towels or other rags hanging because they couldn't find foxtails. And you'll see that in the weavings they sometimes try to put the foxtails in. These kilts are quite short, especially this one here. Later on, as you saw in the Klitzo Dedman carvings, the kilts were longer. But it's not an authentic document, but it's sort of as close as one could get to what the Yebiche dance was like at the time. This is what the dancers actually look like. This is also a very old photograph. As part of the ceremony, it costs already in the dollars of the time, let's say $200 or $300 to put on a ceremony. Now it's $10,000 to put it on because you have to give away foods. You pay the medicine man, you feed the people. And so the gods would go out begging for some money and for some support. So they have and so they're seen in the daytime as begging gods. And you can see the kilts, the leggings with their garters on them, the masks with the feathers, and in the middle is a female Ye who was a woman in this case. In some areas of the reservation, women dance the role of women, and in some other areas, men dance the role of women. There's a fear that if a woman is pregnant or it's her time of month, and if she does a wrong step or something, it might be very bad for her offspring. So some areas, very conservative, feel that only men should do the dancing. In other areas, you'll find both. And that's the same in the weavings. This is an interesting drawing. It was done by a schoolboy, also in the early 1900s, at a Catholic. He was at a Catholic mission school, and an ethnologist from the Brooklyn Museum asked for a drawing of the dance. Now, you know, they were, as I mentioned, the Navajos were not supposed to represent the Yeas in any permanent way. It was also felt that one shouldn't represent the representatives of the Yeas in any permanent way. So in a sense, he should not have been drawing this picture. Perhaps he was at a Catholic school and so was told it was okay, or maybe he was also paid to do it. But you can see quite clearly here that these are the male dancers. They have blue masks. and the back is white. That's the deer skin. They wear their jewelry. They sometimes wear little pouches, little belts. Each one has a sort of different type of skirt. Some have tassels, some have feathers. They wear streamers down their back. Some of them have streamers on their arm. And on the end, you see Yebiche with his squirrel bag and his sacred deer skin across his chest. Sometimes Yebiche is portrayed in long pants, and sometimes he's wearing a kilt. It depends on, again, on the group. Now, as I mentioned, the Navajo weavings were generally geometric weavings. But when we talk about ceremonial weavings, we can define three different kinds, depending on the patterns that were depicted. The sand painting weavings are weavings that show an actual sand painting. Now, these are not true sand paintings. They vary some aspects of it because they don't want to show an actual sand painting. But this is one of the sand paintings that you would see in the Nightway. Or there were people who would weave the Ye figures. The Ye figures have these very stylized, long, straight bodies. And then the Yebiche weaving is a weaving that depicts the dancers. Now, you're perhaps wondering why the Navajos were weaving these, because it was considered dangerous. It was thought you'd go blind, and it would maybe need a Yebiche ceremony to get well if you wove these. It was that at the turn of the century, around 1900, many of the people on the reservation were not well off financially. The women were not well off. Traders had come in because now we had the reservation. The train had come in. The Atchison, Topeka, and the Santa Fe had been built in the 1880s. And this was bringing in tourists. And the tourists said, oh, if I could have a rug with a ceremonial figure on it, I will pay you much more. And so certain women started weaving these to earn more money. They would often go see the trader with the rug all wrapped up, would wait for everybody else to get out of the trading post, would want to go in the back room, would insist on a high price and an extra bonus because they would have to pay the medicine man to do a chant for them because they shouldn't be doing this type of weaving. But gradually, especially in the Four Corners area, we see more and more of these weavings being done. We'll be talking now a little bit about the development of the Yebiche weavings, and I'll show you some pictures and then a couple of actual weavings. This is what the Navajo loom looks like. It's an upright loom, and the warp are these strings that are up and down. And so the Navajo woman decides how big her rug is going to be, and she strings the warp in the exact size of the final rug. You can't cut it off or trim it. You decide exactly how big your rug is going to be, and you string the warp. And then you tie it off with a selvage, and in addition, you tie it onto a stick at the top and a stick at the bottom. And then the stick can be tied down to the lower log or the upper log to get the right tension. And if you're moving with your sheep, you just unwind these ropes at the top and the bottom, roll it all up, move with your herd, and set it up in another place to find another tree or something to set it up. The weaving is the weft, like the word to weave. And the weaving starts from the bottom, and you weave across the bottom, and then you weave back, and that's the work of the weft. The rug is woven from the bottom up. Now, as you saw in the picture of the photograph as well as the earlier picture, the Navajo woman sits on the ground to do this weaving. And if she's going to weave a rug that's 5 feet high, she doesn't want to stand up and do the work. So she's going to have to tie it down. Now, this is where there are two ways of doing the rugs. As you notice, here's the loom. You can do the weaving with the person standing, head, arms, legs, vertically, or you can have a row of dancers. So you then twist the rug, and horizontally you see the row of dancers. The vertical orientation was generally with single dancers, and sometimes with dancers in 3/4 profile. And they were generally woven here around the Gallegos Canyon. That's somewhat off the reservation in the Checkerboard area. And one reason these rugs developed, I think, a little bit off the reservation is that there was probably less pressure from Navajo groups on these women to not do these types of weavings. One of the first weavers was a Navajo who was the wife of a trader, and so she was probably weaving these for him, but she died at age 21, so a lot of other people said, well, maybe she shouldn't have been doing it. That was the Yebiche sickness. So this is called the Gallegos Canyon. Here's an example of a rug of a row of dancers woven from the feet up, but when the rug gets up this high, the woman has to do something about it so she can continue weaving. And what she does is she lowers the top of the rug and then ties down the bottom of the rug, or nowadays curls it up, has another bar, and rolls it up to the back. So this is what she has to plan how she's going to do this rug, because you can't go back and fix mistakes. You're doing a drawing from the bottom up, and you get to here, and then you tie it down, you lower the top, and then you weave up some more, and then you lower it again, and then you weave some more, and then you lower it some more, and then you finish it. And so here's your rug, and you notice that she had a sense of where the middle of the rug is. That you can often mark with even a little knot or something. But she wasn't seeing the rest of the rug. So the lower row of dancers have longer legs and shorter feathers, and for the next row of dancers, she had the legs a little bit shorter, but then she had to extend the feathers because she couldn't bring the border down. She had to do the border where it was. I'm going to show you a couple of weavings of this sort, because the pictures don't always, I don't know if you want to turn the light, which light switch it was, but you can probably see it. This is a rug, as you see, that was woven from the bottom up. You start with the feet and weave to the top. You see some of the elements that of the older type rugs, these geometric elements of the squares. We're in the way of the. Well, let's move over so we don't have this orange on top of it. Okay, so this is a sort of the four corners, could be the four corners of the reservation. This is a cloud formation here. And this is a weaver, and you notice these are early weavings. Suppose you were a weaver and you'd only been doing geometrics, and suddenly you had to do a person because you get more money. You have to figure out how you're going to do it. These Navajo women did not have paper. They did not have pencils. They did not have drawings. They had to keep this entire idea in their head. They had to conceive it from the outset and see it all the way through. She was using now some of the step techniques that she would use in her other weaving. It was perhaps easier that way, but she was trying to put the horsehair fringe on the mask. Only one feather, because nobody has one feather. In other words, that was not breaking a taboo if you changed a few things. So she has only one feather. And this is the gourd rattle. They don't use drums for this dance, just the rattle. You heard the rattle. And this is the twig of spruce. And these are eagle feathers, which are considered sacred. And these are the garters. And she had this dancer in long pants. Some of the dancers did wear long pants if it was very cold, depending on the part of the reservation. We don't know. What would you say, around 1920? Or 1910, 1920? What? We've been finding them. They sometimes show some of the ones that we got when we first started, and then we got curious because there was nothing really written about them. We found at the Skinner auction. And then we started trying to learn more about the rugs. This one is woven by the same person who wove the one you just saw on the loom. It's much smaller and it's much finer, or the same family of weavers. Right, it goes this way. No, it's this way. This is a beautiful piece. You see, somebody thought these were rabbit ears, but they're not. These are the two eagle feathers, and this is the little gourd that sticks out of the mask. And in the right hand, they're holding the rattle, and then the spruce, you see the jewelry they're wearing, the spruce around the neck. And then they're wearing these leggings with garters. And here you see the foxtails, plus the streamers going down there, the backs. This is not the actual dance. This is simply dancers, because if you look at them all, you'll see that there are three, and then one facing at the bottom. There's one facing forward. As you saw the dance, there are teams of 6 men or 6 men and 6 women, and they dance together. But in the rugs, they're not always having 6 if they're spaced. It's an art form. They're 3 or 4 or 8 in this case. So these are all the male yays, right? They're all wearing the same kind of masks. Okay, I can put that over there. Now we're going to do a major computer shift. Let's see. Okay. I'll turn the lights off now a moment. It's not really a part two. It's that I realized that you cannot put that many images on a PowerPoint show without it collapsing and telling you that its memory has given up on you. So it's interesting. You'd think that once you have sort of reached my age, you could sort of back down and just rest. And you have to keep learning new things. I mean, PowerPoint, digital images, Photoshop. Weaving the Dance part two. Here are now a couple of images of vertical rugs that I couldn't bring in. They were too big. Or this one actually is not one of ours. This is one of the ones done by the wife of the trader in the Gallegos Canyon. It's one of the very first rugs showing a dancer. And you notice she put 3 feathers on his head. Again, not 2 or 4. You can see the fox tail hanging down behind him. And she put a cross around his neck. Now, is that a cross to... And some of the early weavings do have the cross. There were missionaries in that area, Methodist missionaries and others. Maybe they felt that was going to protect them somewhat. But the equilateral cross is a symbol of a star, but it's generally not part of the jewelry. And the gourd in the right hand, and a sort of sprig in the left. And those are sacred arrows, which are depicted that way along the side, and the eagle feathers. At the top and bottom are little rainbow bars, and these are for the translocation of the yays. A yay would stand on the rainbow bar, and he's here, and then he's over in another part of the reservation. They move around on the rainbow bars, and so she used that as a decoration. This was probably woven by her sister. Yanapa, we did a great deal of research to find out who Yanapa was, who woven the first rug, and we were able to talk to her granddaughter. And this was probably, many rugs have been attributed to Yanapa, and quite a few were probably woven by her sister because Yanapa died at age 21 and was thought to have woven only 4 weavings. Her sister did quite a few rugs in this similar style with 3 feathers. You can see that they were working together. This was fairly typical of Navajo families at the time, and even now, sisters and relatives will work together and may use a similar pattern. Glenapa used a different border, which for some weavers is a way of distinguishing their work. She put these little figures at the top and the bottom that I sort of think look like bricks, but they're a symbol that you find in the Jedito pottery near the Hopi Mesa. And so this dancer on his elbows is wearing long pendants of feathers and is carrying a sort of a corn plant. There are 2 snake figures up there, but not exactly snake figures, so it's not quite as dangerous. And then the rainbow bars. This is the first rug we found 20 years ago, and we didn't know much about it at all. It was just an interesting piece. It's not in very good shape. Somebody had probably kept it in their screen porch in Maine for about 50 years, so it's faded on one side. This is the unfaded side. But it's a very early rug, and it's very interesting because the weaver was trying very hard to put as many details in as she could. You see the fringes on the kilt and the feathers, the concha belt, the little silver buttons on the moccasins, the fact that the soles of the moccasins are generally a different color from the top part of the moccasins, and obviously the wrong number of feathers. This dancer is wearing a turquoise and coral bead heshe necklace with jacquelas on it, which is an older type of jewelry, which predates the silver jewelry. And there is a vine-type pattern around. The Navajos have 4 sacred plants. Everything's in 4s, corn, squash, tobacco, and so on. This is a rug that is, you wonder if the colors are curious. They are. This is an early rug woven in what was called Germantown yarn. Germantown yarn is commercial yarn that was prepared in Germantown, Pennsylvania, because after Bosque Redondo, the Navajos had lost many of their sheep. They'd been issued blankets. They realized that these blankets, which now we often refer to as Pendleton blankets, these commercial blankets, were much cheaper and easier to get and were very warm. So why bother weaving blankets? And then the certain traders wanted them to continue weaving and issued them commercial yarn. And so they developed very bright patterns. This was in the mid to late 19th century. And this rug, woven in the 20th century, is still woven in these commercial yarns. Contemporary rugs are also now woven often in commercial yarns. But around 1900, there was a move back, since the herds of sheep had increased, to weave Navajo weavings in natural wools. So all the other ones you saw, and the two I showed you here, are done in natural wools with some commercial dyes, but the wool is dyed by the Navajo weaver. This is all a yarn that was purchased. And the rug is interesting. I didn't bring it in, but up here they put a few pieces of yarn sticking out like this to give you the fringe on the top of the mask. And this is woven again from the bottom up. Germantown yarn rugs were often woven on bigger looms and were cut off. So this one was cut off and knotted. That was quite typical of the Germantown yarn, on the Germantown weavings. This is the one you just saw. Now, other Yebiche rugs are woven horizontally. And these mainly were in the area right on the border between Arizona and New Mexico called Lucachukai. Although these weavings are in this whole area of the reservation. And they're often referred to as Lucachukai weavings. Now here you see the weaver has another challenge, which is doing these people on the side. If you recall the Ye weaving, where there were the gods who were very straight and rectangular, you can see how that lends itself very well to the loom, because you just weave them in stripes going across. But if you want to weave people and get the movement in it, you have the challenge of how do you do these zigzags and these lines. I'm showing this here as a straight cutoff when they wove. Actually, the weaver doesn't weave with a shuttle back and forth, but weaves with her fingers. So she only weaves short portions at once and then taps it down. So the rug is often stepped a little bit, and stepped always on a diagonal. And when you come back and weave, these leave lines in the weaving, which are called lazy lines. So she would have tied it down not when it was quite this straight across. But perhaps she did two figures and tried. And now she has to estimate how many figures she's going to get up on the rug to keep the same kind of border at the top and at the bottom. So this got tied down, and then she would weave up some more, and then tie it down, lowering the the bar, and weaving up, and then lowering it again, and then finishing the rug. So here is what she had in mind as she was weaving it. I am just amazed at how these women were able to conceive of a weaving and keep these details going and keep the pattern spread out so that it's quite well balanced. She has a little more space at the top. You see there's a little bit more space at the top than at the bottom. Generally, they would weave so that from the heel of the foot pointing to the toe of the foot, so you can tell. And sometimes you can tell how they've finished off the top and can tell where the top is in that way. So this is the weaving the way we would see it. It's a very interesting weaving because it shows women dancing with their square masks. The square masks are the female Ye masks. The round masks are the head masks. And there are two children in there. Do you see the two little girls? Because this was the initiation ceremony. They're in the skirts of their mothers. They're wearing masks. It's a fanciful interpretation of saying this is an important ceremony for the family. The men are wearing the shorter kilts and talking God with his feathers on my far left has all of the feathers in his hat. It's hard to see them there. And he's wearing a kilt. Sometimes he's in long pants, sometimes he's in a kilt. The white is a body paint, a chalk body paint. Now if you go to a Yebiche dance, they're sometimes wearing white long johns because this is in winter. It's sometimes very cold when they're doing these dances. Here is another one. This time the weaver tried to show you that it was the night way, with a brown background. You have the yebiche at the end, and then you have the alternating male and female dancers. And you can see how the weaver tried to get the idea of this spruce ruff. There are little green lines coming down to show the little bit of spruce branches around the... This is another weaver's interpretation of the dance. It's a little greener. The masks could be blue to turquoise to green. They were colored with a mineral pigment, and it depended on the part of the reservation you were at as to which color you used. And the Navajo language doesn't have a word that says green and a word that says blue. The word covers these shades of green to turquoise to blue. You can see the foxtails here with little white ends on them. This was an interesting dance. This is when you think how complicated it is to weave these dances, here there's movement. She was trying to show the legs up, the dancing, the movement, a couple of women in there. This is Water Sprinkler, the clown who has an old fox fur that he throws around. And this is probably the time of Curtis. The kilts look pretty short to me. This is two other gods plus Yebiche who show up at a different time in the Nightway ceremony. The other two are not there in the Monster Slayer and Fringemouth are not in the Yebiche dance. Notice at the bottom, however, you see there's a break here. The Navajo weavings, the old Navajo weavings were done in stripes, so that all kinds of creative energy that you had in the rug could get out or wouldn't be trapped inside. And when they were told to put borders around rugs, because people in New England like bordered rugs, they often put a little line to let the energy out. They would break that line. And sometimes they would just break it. This one is broken on both sides, if you look. It was woven this way, right? So it's broken on both ends. Sometimes they would just put a small thread through that nobody would see, but they knew they had come out to the outside. This is a fanciful view of that part of the dance that was sort of like the Virginia reel, where men and women come down the aisle, but they switched them. Normally the men would always be on one side, the women on the other side. And here, too, the weaver started weaving. She realized she made the next group a little taller. That still wasn't enough. There was space. Like she added somebody across at the top, perhaps showing that this is, that they go down and then they turn around and come back up. And it's a rather nice composition with the border. And if you look carefully at the border, well, we don't have time, you can see there are little irregularities. Again, nothing should be perfect for the Navajo weaving. There should be always some irregularity. This is a slightly more standardized weaving. This one is quite large. It's interesting because there's a sort of a beadwork in these armbands, which imitate the type of weaving that they would use for these bands. This is a newer stylized rug. Once certain weavers found that they could get better, they would be paid better for these rugs. And they had to be paid better. It took so much longer to weave them in the first place. Plus, it was a subject they shouldn't be weaving. They developed each one developed their own idiosyncratic way of showing the people, so that once you get going and you've woven this one in another week or two or a month or two, you can weave another one, and you've worked out your way of weaving people. And so you can see very carefully here how this is a sort of standardized way of showing the people and talking God looking forward. This has fairly standardized people with their fox tails and their ribbons and their ruffs around the neck. And it's very interesting because it shows the Yeas, the gods with their square heads, who are supposed to be watching the dance and bringing their good powers in on the dance ground, and all those who are in attendance. And they're meshed together, two of the sacred arrows of the sun around the edge. Well, that's the end of the pictures, and I have a couple of rugs of this other type I will show you. We'll start with Can we have some light? We can turn this off, too. Do you have the light behind you? Oh, we still have light. Let's find a place to stand where you can see this. This is the one you just saw. which is a small one done in this style. This is a sort of coarser weave. We'll do this, and then we'll do. And this is a small one, but it's kind of cute. It's a rather fine weave. A sort of idiosyncratic way of doing the gourds and showing the ruffs. Here you can see how the style of making this look like little branches of spruce or juniper around. And then here, very faintly, maybe it's better on this side, just backward, there's the foxtails in brown with little white tips. And these two people are going this way, and they tried to get the feet of this one going forward. I guess she decided that wasn't quite so great and turned them the other way around at the end. I don't think so, but it's part of the, now the Pueblos are also, if you visit the Pueblo ceremonies, there are several of the dances where they're in Pasa. And here I will need your help, because this one is bigger. This is to give you an idea of what a longer rug was like. It was woven in this direction, and here at this point, if you look, you see these funny marks here? This is where it was tied down. You know, as they lowered it in the old style, they would have to keep the tension, so they sewed it down hard and stretched it, and it sometimes leaves the tie-down marks. Nowadays, they have a separate system. They roll the rug to the back. They still can't see what's on the back of it, but you don't see the tie-down marks. This is an earlier one. You have Talking God over here. You're beginning to know who these people are, right? And then with all the feathers, then the male, female, male, female, male, female. They did try to get a little bit of the foxtail in there. And this is the young clown, water sprinkler, who is sometimes in long pants, but here he's in body paint and a kilt, and he wears the spruce across his body, and he carries this ratty foxtail or other fur that he swings around and clowns around. So here you are. Most people would not, the weavers would not want them on the floor, because you shouldn't be, first of all, you shouldn't be weaving them. You certainly shouldn't be walking on them. So they're meant to be, held up. But as I said, it's the whole weaving that's the creative process. Once the rug is done, it's less important. So this is one reason these rugs, I think, are still around, is that they haven't, for the most part, have not been on the floors, because people did put them on walls. That's why sometimes they are faded on one side, because they weren't changed. Well, this is probably around 1920. Probably 1920. Well, the question was, how old is the rug? I forgot to repeat the question. About 1920. All of these dyes are aniline dyes. Yes, they're chemical dyes. Already in the 19th century, they were chemical dyes. They were then sold to the traders in little sachets, little envelopes. They had to be mixed in a certain way, and then a mordant had to be added so they wouldn't run. And since the Navajos are in a very dry area where it's very hard to find enough water even to drink, not to say washing the wool and cleaning the wool, they would try to clean the wool the best they could and then dye it. And so in these older weavings, you see shifts in color in the wool. Another thing I found fascinating, we were watching a demonstration by a weaver of Two Gray Hills Weavings this summer, and she was weaving very fine yarn, but she had a ball of yarn, and she said, well, she was weaving her rug, which would be about this size, and this was that color brown. She knew in her head exactly how much of each color, not only did she have the whole design in her head, but they also, they didn't make too much red or a whole batch of something. They were frequently making just about the right amount of yarn, because otherwise you have too much that's color to color you don't need unless you're doing another weaving. And another thing, if you look at many of these rugs, I don't recall with that one, but for some reason in these yebiche weavings of the 20s and 30s, you sometimes find that one color is commercial, Germantown, a commercial yarn, almost as if that's a safety thing. Or, you know, they've woven in maybe a light green is commercial, or a little touch of orange is commercial, and otherwise they're generally done with the natural homespun yarns that have been dyed.
So is there cutoff? What cannot date
We have, it's very hard because once certain trading posts had certain dyes, and they had them for longer than you thought. You knew that people were not bringing in commercial yarns after a certain time to certain areas, but certain traders had an oversupply. Or certain weavers had certain, so just because there's some commercial yarn, you know, just because it's a Germantown type yarn, which you'd expect to be 1880, 1890, it could be not even 1920. Somebody still had the yarn around. They didn't do much weaving during World War II because the price went up on wool because they needed uniforms. And so they got as much money for selling the wool as they would for doing weaving. So, you know, so they had some commercial, so some of this commercial yarn shows up after World War I. We've been trying to date the rugs. That's a very difficult question. You can try to date by the pattern, by the weaving. The only way to really date a rug is if you can find either a receipt, the year it was bought, so you know it was not woven before that. You still don't know how much before, but it was probably new at the time. Or you find a photograph that's dated. And recently on eBay, somebody had discovered old photographs of a Mr. Marble who had been in the Navajo Reservation in 1910, 1911, and also in 1925, 1926. And one of these weavings showed a weaver with a large yebiche weaving, and it was identified as having won first prize in Santa Fe in 1926. Well, we have been, in our research, we have gone and we've been in contact with over 100 museums, and we know the Navajo yebiche holdings in all the museums in the United States. And we could identify this rug as being one that was in the collection of the University of Colorado, so we were able to let them know that that rug was 1926. We found another picture of the fair in Santa Fe in 1922, and way in the wall in the back was a rug, and we could tell it was one we had just seen at the Smithsonian. And it had been dated according to its yarn as 1940, but here it was on the wall in 1922. You know, so even the experts have trouble dating yarn. It's only by continuing this research into photographs and questions of provenance and letters that we're starting to try to date some of these rugs a little bit more accurately. People thought they weren't really woven until the late 1920s, 30s, but the designs were pretty much set already in the very early 1920s. And during part of that period, the Gallup intertribal ceremonials began, and tourists were coming to see the Indians, and the Indians were selling their things. And at that point, after World War I in the 20s to the 30s, these taboos seemed to have been gone. Medicine men were doing sand paintings in Gallup, New Mexico. Yebiche dancers were dancing their dances without the masks, because the masks are the very holy part. But this was all quite, people were painting yays on walls of hotels, the Navajo Hotel in Gallup. And now there's a much more conservative movement. You know, probably people shouldn't have done this. We should be a little bit more careful. And even on the reservation now, there are people who weave these weavings and who show them openly, or who paint the pictures and show them openly, and others who are cautious about it. So it's different. But the Navajo people is one of the tribes that has done well. They've stayed in their area. There are now over 200,000 Navajos. At least half are off the reservation, but it's one tribe that's still around, and many young women are still weaving, so that's good news. Well, thank you very much. Another question? One last question?
There's some other women who became well-known. I know, like, if you look at Black Pottery, Black System, Maria Martinez or not. Are there some women who actually gained some notoriety or prominence?
Well, the one who was named in the literature early on was Yanapa, whose rug I showed you, and we identified Glenapa. Then There are a couple weavers who were identified in 1926 because there were some of their weavings at the Grand Canyon, and a photographer took down the names and the weavers and did the pictures. And now, of course, if you're looking at weavings, from 1960 or 1970 to the present date, many of them are identified. Most of them now, the last 10 years are almost all identified. The trader will often take a picture of the weaver with her rug, and if you buy a new rug, you have the name of the weaver. And some weavers have their own little signature in the rug. Sarah Paul Begay puts a little arrow down in the corner of the rug. So a pot, you can sign your name. How are you going to sign a rug? So that gets tricky. But sometimes something in the border is right. Yes?
The most famous weaver is not on that type of rug, it's not a woman, it's a man. His name is Steve Shaw, who was also a great medicine man. He was convinced somehow by the traders that the same paintings have to be preserved in a permanent form so that other medicine men would know how to create that same painting. But that's the only great weaver that is known nowadays.
Almost all of his rugs are identified and are in collections. The Wheelwright Museum in Santa Fe was created to hold many of his rugs. There is also a trader researcher by the name of Mark Winter who has given life again to the Tuatalina trading post, the Two Gray Hills, and he's just put out a book where he's trying to do the genealogies of all the weavers of that style rug. So there's work being done in the area, but it's not like pottery that you can sign.
There's very simple striped rugs with the grays and yellows and so forth. Are they woven in between the images weavings, or before, or since, or?
There were weavings with stripes already 150 years ago. Then there was a movement toward borders to make these look more like rugs. There was then a revival in the area of Chinle and Wide Ruins, which is roughly where Canyon de Chelly is, where a trader there, Cozy McSparran, encouraged his weavers to go back to vegetal dyes and old patterns. So there's some very beautiful, tightly woven rugs, and they're almost pastel colors. They're all dyed with certain plants, mustard plants and sage and mountain mahogany, and are done in stripes in that pattern. So it depends. A weaver is generally doing one, maybe the Yebiche is a little bit special. Of all the Navajo rugs woven, maybe 1% have ceremonial images on them. And there are 10 Ye rugs for every one Yebiche rug, and the sand painting rugs are even more rare. But weavers generally develop a certain style and weave within that style. They don't go jumping across 5 or 6 different styles, but they develop a style and then perfect it. So there are now people who have their own style of Yebiche weavings, and they're quite well known, and they produce primarily Yebiche style weavings, and others are doing different types of geometric weavings. Yes?
So is there a distinction between the Ye rugs with the figures and the Yebiche that have the grandfather?
The Ye rugs are the gods, and it's probably going to be too hard for me to get that picture back on the screen. I should be able to turn this off in some way. There, it makes more noise, but it turns off. This, if you can see it, is the Ye rug, right? The gods. The figures are very straight, and they have square heads, and their arms are held in a certain way, like a V. They generally have their little pouches that stick out to the side, and their feet are very stylized and look a little bit like hoofs. Whereas the Yebiche, the effort here is to make them look like people. So one simple sign is that they have feet that stick out like feet. They generally have stockings on. The men generally have stockings that go up to their knees. And similarly, they try to show the shoulders and the arms. And they use the square mask as the woman's mask, so you still see the square head. But if it's the male yay, it's a round mask, and they try to make an effort making it either hexagonal, octagonal, sort of round, sort of humped. There are different ways of doing it. The terminology over the years was a little bit interchangeable. People would say it's a yebiche rug, meaning it was a sand painting rug because sand paintings were in the yebiche dance at the turn of the century, and even now the terminology is now beginning to be clearer, but there are many people who just say yay, meaning both types of rugs. Yes?
Wonderful collection you have at the Museum of National Heritage. Is that traveling around the country? Has that happened this year?
No, it's rolled up. Some of them are here. It has not been traveling, no. But if you're interested, I did bring a few copies.